Chapter 24. Coffee. Washington Market, shame and disgrace to Gotham, but nevertheless the greatest entrepot for flesh and fowl, and things for human consumption in the States, was visited by Cleo and Prince very early one morning. We are constrained to say that they had made a night of it, she never having been there before. To be sure, she could have visited this place, as she could the Atlantic Garden in the habiliments of her own sex, but as she probably never would have done so at the early hour at least, when the busy bees, the butchers and buyers, swarmed thicker than 9 in a bed, and meat went off like hotcakes on a frosty morning, she suggested the visit, and her companion seconded the suggestion. After thoroughly doing the great meat mart, going through the entire labyrinth huddled with humanity and packed with provisions, seeing more beef, mutton, poultry, and garden produce than she had ever seen before, wondering where it all went to, then wondering that the wretched place, a travesty of markets, could supply the many thousands it did, she and her companion, at the latter's suggestion, went into a well-known and popular restaurant, cheap but not nasty, right within the market limits, we might say, to get breakfast. At the table where they seated themselves sat 2 well-known market men with whom Prince was acquainted, Ben Emerson, the jolliest, and Billy Ward, the handsomest of the fraternity. The one fond of a joke and an exemplar of good nature, the other fond of diamonds and an admirer of the fair sex. While Cleo and Prince were proceeding with the matutinal meal, amid the loud calls of the waiters, the rattle and clatter of knives and forks, and the sharp class of a crockery, a Teuton, fat, fair, and 40, evidently a market man, got a seat at the table next to them. They did not see him, but the market man opposite did, and Emerson looked at Ward with a twinkle in his eye, and Ward looked at Emerson with a smile creeping out from under his black mustache. The twinkle and the smile were significant, but of what, Cleo, who noticed them, could not conjecture. Suddenly, the short, sharp, shrill bark of a dog was heard. Cleo looked around quickly. It came from immediately behind her, but saw no dog. Scarce was it uttered when a chorus of barks followed, the voices ranging from a piping treble to a thorough bass, and then came a thunderburst of barking, baying, howling, and growling, attended by a feline symphony of mewing and yowling. With not a dog or cat in the place, the human voice divine it was that produced these sounds. Cleo was at a loss to understand it, and so was Prince. Ben Emerson explained. The Teuton alluded to was a sausage butcher, as he expressed it. The Teuton was a capital sausage maker, but a very poor joke-taker. Notwithstanding the one and the other, the market-men would have their little joke at his expense whenever he came in and the market-men felt like it, and they most always did. They would commence the cat and canine concert with a whistling accompaniment at times, as the whistling for dogs. The Teuton would wax wroth, and the concert would deepen. He would become exceedingly incensed, and the concert would heighten. Exasperated then beyond endurance, he would throw down his knife and fork, jump to his feet, his face flaming with anger, and roar, rave, rage, swear, gesticulate, and foam at the mouth, all in Low Dutch, giving vent to some mixed English, when he would dash out of the place, with breakfast or dinner not half put in, amid roars of laughter and cat and dog chorus, as he did on this occasion, shrieking out before he got to the door,
Mein Gott ein Himmel, you shoot one goddamn backs of lovers and frauds, you piece, and I smashed those damn heads you got off mit his hand. By damn.
Shaking his fist fiercely as he spoke, he vanished without putting his terrible threat into execution, the vocal din heightened by his impotent rage and never-to-be-executed threats, and greatly to the amusement of Cleo and Prince, who both declared the little episode to be worth all the rest of the morning's entertainment. For the truth of this relation, the reader is referred to any Washington market man. And Cleo took in the coffee and cake saloons, that is, 2 of them, these being the types of all, and sufficient. Bush's, in the basement of the Sun Building, and Johnny and Harry in Houston Street, being the 2 visited, the first at about 2 a.m., when editors, reporters, pressmen, feeders, compositors, devils, and newspaper attachés generally, with other night laborers and prowlers, were discussing woodcock, another slang term for pork and beans, sleeve buttons, or cakes and coffee. At about 3 a.m., they fetched up at Johnny and Harry's, where was assembled a different sort of congregation, being composed of masculine and feminine humanity, much of it low degree in the social scale, with grades ranging up to respectable, whose calling, inclination, and habit, or whom exigency, pleasure, or accident kept out till that hour, and very likely, some of them, until 5 o'clock in the morning. The congregation, gathered at that hour, a.m., was nothing if not motley. Scrub actors, minstrels, gamboliers, but not very gay, callous sports, men who would hardly be trusted as bank cashiers, though they might not, if so trusted, out-tainter, late of the Atlantic National Bank, but now of Ludlow Street Jail. Men who didn't find watches and pocketbooks lying around loose, but who found watches and pocketbooks nevertheless. Men who would have to experience a change of heart to be recognized by the godly, who, by the way, don't go much out of their way to effect this change in others. Owls of varied patterns, from respectable, they would so affirm, owls caught out on a lark or for some other reason out, to owls whose respectability, if they ever possessed any, had long ago waned and set, with other night birds, including night hawks, who preyed on the public, but never prayed with that portion of the public that gathers at prayer meetings, nor in their closets prayed. The feminine fraction, vulgar fraction, of the congregation was not such a varied lot as the masculine majority in a moral point of view, or, say in point of personal purity or chastity, there not being one present to whom the lines of the poet, some poet, pure as the virgin snow that spotless lies, a crown on Chimborazo in the skies, could be fitly and truthfully applied, barring our heroine, of course, all being a trifle off-color in respect to chastity, and in polite parlance termed soiled doves, all stained, but some, doubtless, apart from this, less deeply steeped in turpitude than others. Such the congregation, and such as it was hungry, and partook at Johnny and Harry's, an all-night place of woodcock, boned turkey, sleeve buttons, coffee and cakes, or anything else the menu set forth, or the cuisine afforded. Johnny and Harry not seeking to probe the moral wounds of their patrons, a practice more honored in the breach than in the observance at all public places, those of the highest respectability, even, but looking out sharply that their customers cancelled their obligations on the spot, as in duty bound they should. And Cleo was both amused and pained more than amused, when she looked from some of the masculines whose grotesque deportment, speech, and style of eating were amusing to her, to the fallen feminines feeding with their fancy fellows. Pretty, some of them, the feminines, and young, and not long in the mire of pollution into which they had fallen from virtue's high, proud pediment. A few of the many that might be reclaimed, if society but did its duty, its simple duty, only that and nothing more, instead of ignoring the fallen ones, and worse, treading them underfoot, and deeper into the mire with the high heel of immaculate virtue, assumed, we are bold to presume, in too many instances, which passes on with an I am holier than thou tread, without a pause for the hand to extend it itself, or the heart to beat with sympathy, the feminine portion of society treading the hardest and the fiercest upon their sisters. Fallen, it is true, but yet their sisters. Woman's inwomanity to woman keeps countless thousands in pollution's mire. It has been so ever, and ever so 'twill be. Woman has no heart for woman, no pity, no charity, no forgiveness, and no better in too many cases. Worse in the case of the secretly sinning wife, and how many secretly sin? For her sin is hidden, the condemned one's revealed. The tempted and betrayed she frowns upon and spurns. The tempter and betrayer she smiles upon and countenances. Singular, isn't it? Such were Cleo's reflections. Chapter 25. Tiger. A week after the night of the Water Street adventure. It was about 10 p.m. when Cleo and Prince left the Hoffman house. Both were got up regardless. Cleo looking particularly nobby in her elegant and fashionable and faultlessly fitting garments, glossy hat and highly polished boots, gleaming gold chain with unique charms and flashing solitaires, lavender kids and inseparable whip, with its heavy mounting of chased gold. And Cleo was in the best of spirits, bright, sparkling, gay, jolly, happy. And the why, as she told Prince, was because Miss Horton, née Martin, whom her protégé, whom she had seen that day, had declared she was perfectly happy with her husband, her devoted lover, and because Lily, her present protégé, Vida Vining her true name, was as happy as she could be. Happier, by far, than a week before she would have supposed she ever could be. Gladdened by the interest and deep concern Cleo took and felt in her case, thankful and grateful towards the one who had befriended her, and, having heard the story of Sue Martin from the lips of her benefactress, receiving from the latter a voluntary promise to do what she could to bring about a consummation devoutly to be wished by her Lily, she was hopeful of the future in her own case, from the success in the past of her benefactress in Sue Martin's case. Happy indeed was Cleo, when she made others happy, or lightened them of all the misery possible. But wasn't she a horrid creature, to be sure, to treat Mrs. Grundy with so much disdain, to honor more in the breach than in the observance the conventionalities of society, and, above all, to don and wear abroad, even after she was strongly suspected, the habiliments of the other sex? A most heinous crime. What if she made others happy, or less miserable than when she found them? Did not this awful masquerade far outweigh in the balance the good she did, if it did not absolutely annul the acts of charity, the deeds of goodwill, the doings of sympathy she was guilty of? We shall leave this question with the reader. Having seen something of the elephant, been among the bulls and bears of Wall Street, the wolves of Water Street, and other localities where wolves are the rule and lambs the exception, and hobnobbed with the lions of the metropolis, Cleo was resolved to beard the tiger in his lair, see the chamberlain in his halls. She had long known the urbane and handsome proprietor of the most popular, elegant, and best-known clubhouse in the States, and, in her assumed character, had been introduced to him. Now, she would see him at home in his elegant halls, with vassals and serfs attending to the wants of the visitors and friends of the hospitable head of the house. "You will caress the animal a little, I suppose?" said Prince, smiling, as they ascended the steps of the imposing clubhouse in 25th Street, forninst the Hoffman House. "A little, Hal. Just for a flyer, you know," returned Cleo, laughing. "Yes, I shall feel of his paws," she continued. "If they are velvety, I'll pinch them, and the claws will come to the front. I don't wish to carry away any more than I bring, and I don't mean to leave with much less, Hal. I would like to see the animal in his most gracious mood, passive and yielding, and see him turn in a savage way, salient and retentive, and then I shall know what 'tis to be favored, and the frowned upon of fortune." "Stick to him, and you'll know what 'tis to be the latter," said Prince with a laugh, adding, "You'll find his claws without a doubt." As he spoke, he rang the bell. It was quickly answered by a black servitor in black and white, the vest, shirt front, collar, and necktie spotless as the virgin snow. They were admitted without question, and politely ushered into the reception room to the left, a good-sized apartment with folding doors, closed and shutting it off from another, and larger in the rear. It was brilliantly lighted, and superbly furnished and appointed. The carpet, an Axminster, was a magnificent production of the loom, its color the richest, its pattern the most admirable, its quality the best, and its thickness such that the foot in its tread sunk into it an inch. The furniture, of carved rosewood, was of the newest designs, the finest workmanship, and superbly upholstered. The curtains and hangings, with their fringes and tassels and cornices, were tasty, rich and elegant. The beautifully frescoed walls were hung with the finest specimens of the art, beautiful, both from the easel and the burin, representing mythology and horsology, while bronze and marbles were not wanting to complete the picture, upon which the light from an elegant chandelier, pendant from the frescoed ceiling, shed its radiance. An air of elegance, devoid of ostentation, pervaded the apartment, and Cleo, who pronounced it good, the tout ensemble, was made perfectly at home almost instantly upon her entrance by the greeting that she and Prince received at the hands of the bland, the courteous, and the handsome proprietor, to whom Prince was known, and who recognized her as Mendez, calling her Dawn in his quiet, pleasant way, as he shook her hand, having come forward to meet and greet the pair the moment they entered, leaving 2 or 3 friends he had been chatting with, to whom he excused himself. 5 minutes thereafter, and the trio were engaged in discussing a bottle of wine, Cleo's favorite, Widow Clicquot, which the host had ordered on, and conversing on the subject of horses, always a favorite topic with our heroine, who, a superb horsewoman, as our readers have seen, with no unversed horsewoman, being able to talk horse with a glibness that a Jerome Park jockey might envy. Half an hour, perhaps, the three conversed on the horse topic, and matters and things relating to the fiercer beast, whose lair was there, not being once alluded to. "Well, Mr. Chamberlain," said Cleo at length, setting down an empty glass and taking forth a cigarette, which she rolled in her fingers and lighted. "We came here, I did, to see the tiger. Is the animal on exhibition this evening?" This query was put with a radiant smile, and smilingly replied to by the gentleman questioned, in the affirmative. "Would you trot him out, or trot us out, to his lair, Mr. Chamberlain?" she again laughingly queried. The response may be surmised. A parting of the folding doors, and the place was revealed where the pampered pet of the playing portion of the public, very large, was kept in duress, awaiting the carcass of whomsoever might feel disposed to fondle it, taking the risk of getting scratched in the play, the owner of the animal never advising or suggesting contact with the beast, but not unfrequently advising the contrary, as when he did in the case of our heroine, to whom he said, or rather in the first instant of whom he asked, "Have you ever ventured within the reach of the animal, Dawn?" To which query Cleo replied in the negative, the other saying, "Then I wouldn't advise. Or, rather, I would advise you not to go within reach of his claws, but view him at a little distance." Resolved to try the temper of the tiger to a trifling extent, Cleo replied gaily, "Oh, I'll pat him on the back a little, and if he's in an ugly mood, I'll get away. If he draws 200 or 300 spots of blood, it won't much matter." As she said this, she approached the spot where the tiger was disporting itself, a number of gentlemen fondling the animal, and others watching the sport, not inclined to participate, for reasons prudential or otherwise. Let us say that the lair of the tiger was, in its furniture and appointments, ornaments and elegancies, as sumptuous as the apartment in front, and far more populous, and opening from it was a smaller room, nothing if not elegant, devoted to gastronomic pleasures, where Epicurus himself might have feasted to his satisfaction, and where his disciples, some of them, did feast, before or after exercising with the tiger, where the table groaned with the luxuries of the season, with game and grosser meats, salmon and salads, and other things that epicures most delight in, and where an elegant buffet supplied the soothing vin de champagne, or the more potent products of the press, and still the cigars as well, the feast free to all visitors, and to which, of course, Cleo and Prince were cordially invited by the urbane and hospitable Lord Chamberlain of the institution. What with the company present, some walking about and smoking, some standing here and there in groups and talking, some wooing the sparkling widow, or trying the temper of her more fiery sister, cognac, some delving deeply into the delectable dainties of the table, with some, appeased by a feed fit for the fabled gods of antiquity, lolling contentedly in the easiest of chairs, to say nothing of the trim, polite, and attentive dark-complexioned servitors, moving smoothly about, without fuss or flurry. The apartments presented a pleasant, animated, and altogether brilliant appearance. Magnificence and mirthfulness, splendor and suavity, chance and champagne obtained there, and the tiger played with those about him, and was gentle and yielding, and rude and grasping by turns, his paws now velvet, his claws now extended. "A stack of chips. Blues." It was the voice of Cleo, who had seated herself at the table of the tiger, very nearly opposite the animal's keeper, taking the seat of a gentleman, who, upon vacating it, remarked with a forced nonchalance, "That is a devilishly unlucky seat tonight." The tiger had scratched him, rudely, if not savagely and deeply.
Chapter 22. Continued. Cleo, full of laughter at her novel situation on the shoulders of the rude, rough fellows shouting for music, instantly complied with their demands, giving Widow Machree with variations, 20 voices singing the song, and all, with the exception of Prince and the blonde, enlisting in her bodyguard, which carried her round and round the hall until she had played several tunes, when it marched to and halted at the bar, letting her down then. Such as it was an ovation, the greatest that could have been improvised on the occasion, a spontaneous and simultaneous recognition of, and tribute to her musical skill and power. We have nothing more to relate concerning the occurrences of that night, except to say that Cleo, with Prince and her new protégé, got away from Jack Perry's about 11, a carriage, which the former had ordered, being in waiting for them, and which conveyed the patroness and her protégé to the former's residence and Prince to his hotel. Chapter 23. Cobwebs. A week later. Cleo had appeared abroad but twice during this time as Don Juan, she remaining indoors for the most part with her new protégé, who still remained with her, and who, in consequence of the great reaction resulting from the sudden and tremendous change in her affairs, from a life in the slums to a life in an aristocratic quarter, from a Water Street dance hall to a 23rd Street palace, had given way under it, becoming completely prostrated, mentally and physically. Cleo did for the beautiful blonde as she would have done for a sister, and had the satisfaction at the end of the week of seeing her protégé in a much better physical and mental condition, and as happy, or, at all events, as contented as under the circumstances connected with her life, she well could be. And Cleo, who had taken the betrayed and beautiful blonde to her house and heart, felt her great reward in the belief that she had snatched a brand from the burning, rescued a good and beautiful sister from a life of degradation and shame, pollution and misery. During the 2 days and evenings she had appeared out in the rôle of Don Juan, Cleo had travelled with Prince, and had paid short visits to sundry and diverse places. She and the latter got downtown as far as Duane Street, and visited the well-known and much frequented, not to say elegant and high-toned, Cobweb Hall, a drinking place of great renown and many years' standing. Founded in 1800 by David Petula, now deceased, whose specialty in winter-time is hot whiskey, plenty of it in pint goblets and good, and in summer milk punch, whose walls are beautifully frescoed with cobwebs, and from whose ceiling the gossamer structures, hardly gossamer, though, as they are heavy and black with the dust of 7 decades, hang in graceful festoons, with festoons from festoons hanging, cobwebs that are never brushed away, cobwebs that have hung there since the first day of Cobweb Hall, and which are wondered at by strangers, deeply respected by habitués, venerated by the attachés, and which were idolized by the venerable but now defunct Petula, and which no man, valuing his well-being, had best disturb, in whose folds and flaps, and deep and dark recesses, septuagenary spiders live in calm, unruffled retiracy, after a long and active life spent in the pursuit of flies and pleasure, while spiders in the prime of life, and sportive spiders in the heyday of young and exuberance, dart hither and thither at flies entangled, and revel, the youthful and fast, in riotous living and excess, without let or hindrance, and sans peur, for they are as safe from harm in a Cobweb Hall as a sacred bull of Brahma in a Hindu temple. So thick, reader, are the cobwebs here, that a fly coming in from the street has a small show of ever getting out again, about as much as has a man who gets into Ludlow Street jail for debt. And the spiders all, old and young, are as tame as pet kittens, know the old habitués, will come at their call, being always rewarded with flies. This has a tendency to make them less self-reliant than they would otherwise be. While it is no uncommon thing to see a dozen or more spiders skating over the person of a bartender, there are 6 or 7 knights of the toddy stick behind the bar, and always actively engaged, or playing hide-and-seek in the capillary growth surmounting his head, while he is engaged in shaking up a milk punch. Truth compels us to state, however, that in the matter of sobriety, the spiders, or many of them, if weighed, would be found wanting, having a strong penchant for milk punch, and not unfrequently getting tipsy. Let us say, however, that at the death of the venerable David Petula, peace to his ashes, the spiders, to a man, fasted for a fortnight, and went into heavy mourning, the duration of which was only exceeded by that of Queen Victoria for Prince Albert. If not delighted, Cleo was pleased to note the peculiarities of the Petula place, and by no means regretted her visit to Cobweb Hall, with its cobwebs and spiders, its plebeian lunch table, its long bar and sub-bar with their busy bartenders, its dingy and dark back room, where the genus homo sat and smoked, drank and quaffed, and laughed and talked of things that had delighted them in former days, or discussed the affairs of the nation, with its shelved bottles and kegs, never dusted, its bow windows never washed, its panes thick with the accumulated dirt of 70 years, the window being made bow by the settling of the building, which would have broken the glass long ago but for the dirt thereon. She visited the Atlantic Garden in the Bowery, the headquarters of King Gambrinus in Gotham, where lager flows as freely as water from a fountain of nature's handiwork, never shut off, where Teutons most do congregate, night in and night out, day in and day out, not excepting Sunday, by far the greatest day of all at the Atlantic Garden, and drink their favorite beverage, male and female, old and young, from the Teutonic infant, mewling and puking in its mother's arms, to the lean and slippered pantaloon, Teuton, going home none the worse for the beverage they imbibe, good Templars, declarations to the contrary notwithstanding. Where music, good music too, vocal and instrumental, obtains, and general hilarity and good feeling prevail, with pretzels, bologna sausage, Switzer and Limburger käse, ham sandwiches, anchovies, and salt herring, not to omit cakes, cheap bouquets, cheap cigars, and sauerkraut. Where the Teutons swarm like bees, like flies around a molasses hogshead, with quite a large American and Irish representation, and a sprinkling of other nationalities, barring Frenchmen and Africans, these being more conspicuous by their absence than their presence. Not that the one likes the lager the less, perhaps, or the other whiskey the more, but for reasons that must be obvious to the reader. Among the Teutons, Cleo did as the Teutons did, drank lager for the first time in her life, pronouncing it not bad to take, the writer agreeing with her. She was clad that night in her suit of grey, and was in all respects arrayed precisely as on the night of her visit to Water Street, with the addition merely of 3 tea roses pinned to the right lapel of her sack. She looked particularly bright, sparkling and happy. Thoughts, perhaps, of the beautiful blonde she had rescued from the depths may have imparted to her face the look, together with the scene around her, free and easy, hilarious and inspiring. Whether inspired by this or the several draughts of lager she imbibed, certain it is she sung, during a lull in the music, the Watch on the Rhine, striking up suddenly, and without the slightest intimation of her design, if indeed she designed to sing the instant before she burst out. It is unnecessary to say that the Teutons went wild at the song, superbly sung, or that the entire assemblage, stilled to a perfect silence before a score of notes had rung from her lips, burst forth with rapturous applause at the close, vociferously encoring her. Having sung in compliment to the people largely predominating there, she responded to the encore with Erin go bragh, and then every son, or descendant of a son, of the Emerald Isle was a wild Irishman. Again was she applauded, and to the echo, and again heartily encored. To this second encore, after a brief space, her response was, "Columbia's the gem of the ocean," hundreds of voices ringing in on the chorus. 3 cheers for the red, white, and blue, etc. The rain of applause that followed the singing of this stirring national air was tremendous and deafening. The garden fairly shook with the stamp of many hundreds of feet, and from the concussion of the air produced by the stentorian and simultaneous cheers. Cleo blushed to the temples at this tribute to her vocal powers, and taking off her hat, and shaking back her long black locks, bowed to the cheering multitude at all points, turning completely around. In a moment her hands were seized by 2 excited Germans, and shaken with a will, and scores of others also grasped and shook her hands, compliments raining thick and fast upon her, her face flushing with the blushes that one after another quickly came. Lager poured in upon her by scores of glasses, and Rhine wine, and champagne too, Americans, Germans, and Irish, vying with one another, in the matter of testifying their appreciation of the treat she had afforded them, by treating her. It was impossible, of course, for her to drink all set before her, but 2 or 3 glasses of champagne she did drink, managing finally, the female singers of the orchestra striking up a popular air, to get seated, every eye that could be brought to bear upon her, taking frequent glances at her, the handsome young fellow, as she was more than once called, and every eye following her, when she left the garden, which she did, not a great while after she had sung. And Cleo had taken in a restaurant, on the cheap and nasty plan, near Fulton Market, where the tablecloths, slightly off color, were beautifully frescoed with coffee stains and gravy, ketchup, berry, and other stains, to say nothing of the little dabs of butter, bones, pieces of bread, and potato skins that were lying around loose, to the evident satisfaction of myriads of festive and feasting flies that flocked to the tables around about the place. It was a freak of Cleo's going into this place. She wanted to see what a cheap and nasty was, where things are slung at those who come to feed, with a lack of ceremony that would be refreshing, looked at in the light of a change from the set formalities that obtain at well-regulated first-class restaurants, but for the supercilious air, utter abandon, and devoted inattention of the gentlemanly waiters, whose carelessness and indifference are exasperating, where the viands are questionable, the cooking not, bills of fare scarce, and napkins ignored, and what she wanted to see, she saw in all its glory. With a wink and a smile at Prince, she and the latter sat down at one of the tables, the looked at by all present, but not the rushed at by the waiters, by any means. These gentlemen were not to be thrown off their equanimity by a couple of swells. When convenient, one of them came up, and in the most hands-off manner imaginable, rattled off the menu of the establishment, very nearly as follows: Rose bowl, scalp, sheep and hog, boiled salt tossed and halibut, fried clams, liver, tripe and pogies, bone turkey, American coat of arms, sleeve buttons, fried dog, sinkers and floaters, baked modoc, duff, lobscouse and eel pie, etc. Getting through the list, he rested with his fingers' ends upon the table, looked from Cleo to Prince, and from Prince to Cleo, and then commenced to whistle. Cleo ordered a glass of milk. Prince ordered a glass of milk. The waiter looked disgusted. He strolled off, however, in a moment, with a look of utter indifference, and in the course of 10 minutes came back with 2 glasses of milk, depositing with them on the table a 10-cent check. Cleo tipped him a 50-cent stamp to remunerate him for the trouble he had been at in reeling off the menu and attending to their wants, which was received with lofty condescension, and consigned to his vest pocket, as though the tendering of such trifling douceurs was the rule and not the exception in that establishment. Cleo was not a little pleased at the airs of the gentlemanly waiter, and then went at him for information concerning some of the delectable dishes he had named over, they being new to her, learning that salt toss was corned beef, this she knew, however, having heard of it during the war, that bond turkey was simply hash, American coat of arms, pork and beans, sleeve buttons, fish balls, lobscouse, a stew of meat and vegetables, fried dog, sausages, duff, a bread pudding, bake modoc, Indian pudding, floaters, baked apple dumplings, sinkers, boiled ditto, a most appropriate appellation, by the way, the latter. Not having the least desire to test the excellence of either of these delectable dishes, Cleo picked up the check, and, leaving the milk untasted, as did Prince, presented the former with 10 cents for the cashier of the establishment, and departed.